Summer had transformed the field into a sea of colors and sounds, and the air seemed to dance to the rhythm of the festival's melodies. Daniel wandered through the place, absorbing the vibrant energy, until his eyes landed on her. Clara. Something about her made the world stop for a moment. She was laughing, leaning back, with the sun reflecting off her curls, turning them into a golden halo. Daniel had never believed in love at first sight, but at that moment everything changed. He knew he had to meet her. Throughout the day they crossed paths by chance, exchanging curious glances that lingered into smiles. Daniel couldn't take his eyes off her. She was captivating, with a softness that contrasted with the frenzied atmosphere around them. Without even realizing it, he drew closer. Beside her, the deafening noise of the festival seemed to fade, and all that remained was the beat of his heart. They understood each other effortlessly, as if they had known each other for a long time, sharing laughter and stories. The festival became a world of its own for them. They wandered through food stalls, tasting new flavors while exchanging confidences that are usually only shared with strangers who suddenly become friends. The smell of sweet popcorn mixed with the aroma of freshly cut grass, creating a memory that would last forever. Clara was a storm of emotions, and Daniel wanted to dive into the eye of that hurricane. When the sun began to set, the lights turned on, dotting the sky with colors that competed with the sunset. Almost without realizing it, Daniel and Clara were holding hands, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her touch was gentle, and he knew that this connection was rare, something that didn't come along every day. They moved together to the sound of a slow melody, turning slowly, as if time had stopped just for them. Minutes turned into hours, but neither of them wanted to leave the other. There was a silent desire in Clara's eyes, a promise of something more, something beyond the initial attraction. Daniel knew he was also drowning in this feeling. Each laugh was a step toward something they couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. He wanted to know her better, to understand why she seemed so familiar, as if she had already been part of his deepest dreams. When night finally took over the sky, Daniel led her to a quieter spot, away from the festival lights, where the stars shone uninterrupted. They sat on the grass, looking up, and Clara spoke about her dreams and the desires she kept hidden in her heart. She wanted to travel, to see the world, and each word was a piece of a puzzle that Daniel was desperate to complete. He listened as the stars twinkled, as if they were silent witnesses to what was about to happen. Then, under a sky filled with stars, they kissed. It was a kiss that promised the impossible, a silent pact that, no matter what, this moment would be eternal. Daniel could feel Clara's heart beating against his, and each beat seemed to mark the start of something new. They didn't know what the future held, but that night, they were willing to believe in the magic of the present. As they parted, he knew that meeting her had changed everything. Summer unfolded in long, golden days, and Daniel and Clara became inseparable. Since their first meeting at the festival, they began exploring every corner of the city together, discovering new places and sharing small secrets. There was a lightness in every moment they spent together, as if time were suspended, allowing them to live that season in a bubble of happiness. The world seemed to conspire so that nothing would break the enchantment surrounding those days. They rode bikes through quiet streets, discovered hidden cafes, and got lost in conversations that lasted for hours. Daniel loved watching Clara as she spoke passionately about her favorite bands, gesturing and laughing in a way that warmed his heart. Each smile was a new discovery, a new facet of someone he was beginning to love, even if he didn't admit it to himself. There was an innocence and intensity in everything they did, and both knew that summer would be unforgettable. At night, they met to watch the open-air shows. The music filled the air, blending with the scent of flowers and warm earth. Under the starry sky, Daniel and Clara danced together, forgetting the world around them. For them, each song was a personal soundtrack, a memory marking the beginning of something special. While the lights flickered in the distance, they laughed and let themselves be carried away by the rhythm, as if the night would never end. But not every moment was pure joy. There was a foreboding, a shadow that began to form, even though Clara tried to hide it. On a sunny afternoon while walking through a park, she suddenly stopped and looked at Daniel, her eyes carrying a sadness he hadn't expected. It was then that she revealed the news he feared hearing. Her family was about to move to another country. She tried to smile, but it was a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Daniel felt the ground give way beneath his feet. The news hovered over them like a dark cloud, threatening to extinguish the light that had illuminated their days together. Daniel desperately wanted to find a solution, something that would keep her from leaving, but reality was relentless. He knew he couldn't change the fate awaiting them. Still, in the days that followed, they pretended everything was normal, trying to ignore the clock that kept ticking, stealing the time they had left. With Clara's departure approaching, every moment became even more precious. They knew the end was near, but no one wanted to say the words that would make it real. Instead, Daniel and Clara clung to those days like castaways, trying to prolong what was already doomed to end. It was a young, fleeting love, but it was also sincere and overwhelming, as if they had found something people spend a lifetime searching for. On the last night of summer, they went to the festival one last time. The same soft melody from the first day filled the air, bringing back all the memories and emotions they had shared. They danced again, their bodies close, their hearts beating in sync. And as they spun under the starry sky, Daniel couldn't help but think that this moment was a miracle, a gift life had given him, even if only for a brief moment. But deep down, both knew they were on the brink of an inevitable farewell, and this uncertainty lingered over them, leaving the reader anxious for what would come next. The final day of the festival arrived as a cruel reminder that the end was near. Clara and Daniel met early, determined to savor every second they had left. They tried to keep the mood light, as if they were just two more young people enjoying the summer. But there was an underlying tension, a pain they couldn't ignore, no matter how hard they tried. They laughed, hugged, and danced, but behind every smile there was a weight. The farewell was approaching, and neither of them was prepared for it. They walked through the same places they had discovered together, as if they wanted to etch every detail into their memories. Clara spoke about the little things she would miss even before leaving. The cafes, the hidden alleys, the twinkling lights at night. Daniel listened carefully, trying to capture each word and expression. He wanted to remember everything, every moment, every smile, so that when she was no longer there, he could still feel her presence. But reality was cruel, and time waited for no one. That afternoon, they sat on a bench in the park where they had often met. Clara was quiet, looking at the horizon as if trying to find a way to say goodbye without breaking her own heart. Daniel wanted to speak, to say something that could make the moment last forever, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. He knew that no beautiful speech, no grand promise could change what was coming. The distance was an obstacle they couldn't easily overcome. When the sun began to set, they returned to the festival, where it all had begun. The lights shone as before, and the music echoed through the air. But there was a sadness in the melody that seemed to mirror what they both felt. Clara and Daniel found themselves in the middle of the crowd, surrounded by strangers but isolated in their own bubble of pain and longing. And as the final song began to play, they danced as they had on the first night. But this time, each step was a silent goodbye, each movement a desperate attempt to hold on to what was slipping away. Daniel felt Clara's grip tighten as if she were trying to cling to him, even though she knew she'd have to let him go. He wanted to promise they'd find a way, that everything would be fine, but it was a promise he couldn't keep. She would leave, and they'd be separated by an ocean. And although both had said they'd keep in touch, call and write, they knew deep down it wouldn't be easy. The world was forcing them down different paths, and they had no power to change that. As the music came to an end, Clara rested her head on Daniel's shoulder, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. It was a moment of peace before the storm, a brief pause before everything fell apart. When they finally pulled away, there were tears in their eyes, and neither of them tried to hide them. The farewell was inevitable, and the pain they felt was like a sharp knife cutting deep, leaving scars they knew would take a long time to heal, if they ever healed at all. They hugged one last time, and in that embrace was all the love they hadn't been able to express, all the hope they could no longer sustain. They promised to write, to remember, but the future was uncertain, and the weight of reality pulled them down. When they finally parted, Daniel watched Clara disappear into the crowd, and with her, everything he had dreamed of for that summer. The festival ended, but for him, something much bigger had come to an end. And as the lights went out, the reader was left wondering if they'd truly be able to overcome the distance and keep their love alive. The first weeks after their farewell were filled with a torrent of letters and phone calls. Daniel and Clara stayed in contact almost daily, desperately trying to preserve the connection they created during that unforgettable summer. Each written word, each call that crossed the ocean, was a thread that kept them tied together. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, reality began to intrude, creating gaps neither of them knew how to fill. Life went on, and commitments began to consume the time they had once dedicated to each other. Daniel buried himself in his music, seeking in his work an escape from the longing that overwhelmed him. The days dragged on, and though they still exchanged messages, the replies became increasingly spaced out. He found himself rereading old letters, trying to find in them the warmth he'd felt when Clara had still been by his side. But the words, which had once brought comfort, now felt distant, like echoes of something that was fading away. Clara, meanwhile, faced the challenges of a new life in an unfamiliar country. She tried to adapt, build a routine, and make new friends. But there was a part of her that couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. She kept each letter she received in a box, as if it were a precious treasure, but also a painful reminder of what she couldn't have. Gradually, the hustle and bustle of daily life began to stifle the time she dedicated to writing to him, and the distance between them, already vast, seemed to grow even larger. Silence began to seep into the lines of their letters, into the long pauses during phone calls. What had once been a vibrant, living connection now seemed like a memory slowly fading. Both wanted to keep the promise to be there for each other, but life seemed to conspire against this desire. In moments of quiet, Clara wondered if Daniel felt the same pain she did, but she was afraid to ask, to expose the fragility of a bond that already seemed to be unraveling. Daniel tried to fill the void by playing the melodies that had once united them, hoping that music would bring Clara closer, if only for a moment. But with each chord, he felt more distant from her. It was like trying to hold on to fine sand. The tighter he held on, the faster it slipped through his fingers. He wondered if they were destined to lose each other, if that love that had seemed so strong wasn't strong enough to survive the relentless passage of time. A final letter arrived, written briefly and full of apologies, as if Clara didn't know what to say. Daniel read it over and over, searching between the lines for a sign that the feeling was still there. But there was a silent sadness in her words, as if she were slowly saying goodbye. He knew that distance was taking its toll, and that time, relentless, was turning what was once alive into nothing more than a distant memory. And then the letters stopped. The phone, which had so often been a lifeline, fell silent. The absence of news was worse than any word that could have been said. Clara and Daniel went on with their lives, but always with a sense of loss, as if an essential part of themselves had been left behind in that summer. Each carried their memories as invisible scars, marks of a love that could have been but now seemed lost forever. The decades that followed were marked by separate paths. Daniel dove into his music career, letting his passion for music fill the space Clara had left. He traveled the world, performed for crowds, and became a known name. To many, he was a symbol of talent and charisma. But no matter how much success he achieved, there was always an emptiness that even the warmest applause couldn't fill. In moments of silence, when the stage lights dimmed, Daniel still thought of her. Clara, meanwhile, found her way in a distant country. She achieved a promising career in the corporate world and built her own family. At first, she thought of Daniel often, wondering how he was, if he still remembered her. But as the years passed, the memories became rarer, buried under the demands of daily life and the constant pressure to move forward. Both married, had children, and lived parallel lives that never intersected. Daniel followed a hectic routine of shows, tours, and recordings, while Clara dedicated herself to work and family. They learned to smile again, to find joy in simple moments, creating new memories. But there was a part of them that remained untouched, a longing that never completely disappeared, a scar that occasionally ached again. There were moments when Daniel, playing certain songs, felt a wave of nostalgia so strong he could almost see Clara again. He wondered if she still listened to the same songs, if she thought of him when a familiar melody played on the radio. Perhaps she was dancing with her kids in the kitchen or driving down winding roads, and suddenly a summer memory surfaced before fading away. But he pushed those thoughts aside, preferring not to stir memories that could reopen old wounds. Clara, in turn, sometimes found herself looking at old photos, revisiting the summer she had shared with Daniel. They were precious memories but also painful, a constant reminder of what could have been. She had learned to live without him but never to completely forget. In moments of peace, when the house was quiet, she returned to that distant summer, to the boy who had made her feel alive in a way she had never experienced. These memories no longer brought tears, but a gentle melancholy, as if she were reading an old book whose ending she already knew. The years passed and life moved on, dragging Daniel and Clara in different directions. To the world, they were complete, successful, happy people. But beneath the surface, there was always a subtle absence, a longing that surfaced in small moments, in details no one else noticed. It was in the silence between one note and another of a song, in the distant look Clara gave to the horizon, as if waiting to see someone appear out of the blue. They had moved on but never really stopped looking back, even if only for a fleeting moment. Daniel and Clara lived decades apart, and though they no longer had news of each other, the echo of that summer love still lingered. They had learned to accept that certain stories would never have a definitive ending. They continued their lives, built new narratives, but from time to time, each allowed themselves to return to that place where it all began. What they had shared was never completely lost. It was simply kept away, like a soft melody that continued to play, distant but always present. Decades later, when Clara's memory seemed like a faint shadow in the depths of his mind, Daniel received an unexpected invitation. It would be a tribute show for the band that marked that unforgettable summer. He hesitated before accepting, wondering what that event might stir up. But in the end, nostalgia spoke louder, and he decided he wanted to feel, just one more time, the emotion of that time when life seemed so simple and full of promises. The idea of returning to the place where it all began stirred a wave of dormant memories within him. As he prepared for the performance, he found old records, newspaper clippings, and yellowed photographs. As he played the familiar melodies, he closed his eyes and could almost feel Clara beside him, laughing, dancing, as if no time had passed. Each chord transported him back to the summer when he fell in love with her, and the moments they shared unfolded before his eyes like scenes from an old movie. The weeks leading up to the show were a whirlwind of emotions. Daniel found himself consumed by flashbacks, moments he had tried to bury under layers of his busy life. He remembered the way Clara spun to the music, her eyes shining like stars, the smile that lit up her entire face. He thought about how she held his hand, as if he were the anchor keeping her in the present, and he couldn't help but wonder where she was now. Did she still remember him? With each passing day, Daniel felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. He knew music had the power to transport people back in time, and he found himself imagining if Clara might be hearing the same songs. Would she feel the same nostalgia upon hearing the melodies? The thought that she could be somewhere, perhaps even at that same show, reignited a hope he didn't know he still carried. But he dismissed the idea, considering it unlikely and fanciful. On the night of the show, Daniel stepped onto the stage, feeling the weight of all the memories that place carried. The lights blinded him, and he needed a moment to adjust his vision before he started playing. As soon as the first chords echoed, he was instantly transported back to that distant summer, and it felt as if nothing had changed. He played the song he and Clara had danced to so many times, and as he played, his heart raced, as if he were playing just for her again. As he looked into the crowd, a wave of emotion hit him. He saw smiling faces, people dancing, losing themselves in the music. And then, among so many unfamiliar faces, something caught his eye. A face that seemed to be watching him, absorbing every note, every word. For a moment, Daniel thought it was just his imagination, a cruel trick of longing. But when he looked again, his heart stopped. Clara was there, standing in the crowd, with the same look he remembered, blending surprise and emotion. For an instant, all the noise and movement around disappeared. It was as if time had bent and brought them back to the past, to the moment when they were together. The music continued, but Daniel could barely concentrate, his fingers moving automatically over the strings. He had waited for this reunion for years, and now that Clara was there, so close and yet so distant, he didn't know what to do. All he knew was that their long unfinished story might have a new chance to begin. The moment Daniel saw Clara in the crowd, it was as if the world around him had stopped. All the faces and lights blurred, leaving only her, and the music playing in the background seemed to come from a distant dream. He blinked a few times, trying to make sure it wasn't just a cruel illusion born from years of longing and nostalgia. But she was there, as real and tangible as in his memories, with that same gentle, penetrating gaze he had never forgotten. For an instant, Daniel lost the rhythm of the song, his fingers hesitating on the guitar strings. But he forced himself to keep going because he knew that song was important. It was the same song that had united them all those years ago when they danced under the stars, as if they were the only ones in the world. Now, seeing her there, he felt a mix of emotions he didn't know how to express. It was happiness, relief, fear, and above all, a timid hope that time hadn't destroyed what they had shared. Clara moved slowly closer to the stage, as if testing the reality of the moment, trying to see if it was really Daniel playing the song that reminded her of everything they'd lived. She was among strangers, but suddenly she felt as if she were the only person there. Her heart raced and she could barely breathe. It was as if all the emotions she had kept locked away for so long had been unleashed at once, and she didn't know how to handle it. When the song ended, Daniel stood still for a moment, staring at Clara. He saw her expression change, a mixture of shock and emotion, and felt something tighten within him. The audience applauded, but he heard none of it. All that mattered was that, after all those years, she was there. He wanted to run to her, to push through the sea of people and ask so many things, but his feet felt glued to the ground, held back by insecurity and the weight of the time that had passed. Daniel slowly stepped down from the stage, his heart pounding in his chest. His eyes never left Clara's, and she seemed equally entranced. The crowd continued to move around them, but it was as if an invisible space opened, allowing them to draw closer, slowly, until they stood face to face. Everything they hadn't said for years was there, in the looks they exchanged. He saw in her eyes the same light he remembered, a reflection of feelings that had never truly faded. Clara took a hesitant step forward, and Daniel did the same. He was nervous, his hands trembling, but he smiled, a shy smile that carried all the emotion of someone finding a piece of themselves again. She returned the smile, and in it was a sweetness he recognized immediately. Neither knew where to begin, how to sum up decades of separation and all the things left unsaid, but they didn't need words to feel what was happening. It was a silent reunion but full of meaning. For a moment they just looked at each other, absorbing the moment, allowing all barriers to be broken. There was so much they wanted to know, so many questions that needed answers. But in that brief moment of reunion, everything seemed possible. They didn't know what the future held, but the past, which had never fully left them, had brought them back together. And as the night unfolded around them, Daniel knew that somehow their story was far from over. After the show, Daniel found a quieter spot backstage, his thoughts still spinning around the unexpected reunion. He barely had time to process Clara's presence, but he knew he needed to see her again, to talk and understand what fate was trying to do by bringing them face to face after all these years. What he didn't expect was to find her already waiting for him, in a discreet corner with the same look as before, a mixture of anxiety and hope. Clara had spent the entire show trying to calm the whirlwind inside her. Watching him play, all the memories of that summer came rushing back in such a vivid way that it was as if no time had passed. She had followed him backstage, still uncertain of what she wanted to say or do. But one thing was clear: she couldn't let this moment slip away. They had been separated by distance, by choices, but now chance seemed to be giving them a second chance. Daniel approached slowly, hesitant, trying to read in her features some clue of what Clara was feeling. The last time he had seen her, they had been young, full of dreams and promises they had never been able to keep. Now both had changed, shaped by life experiences, responsibilities, and the loves that had come and gone. Yet there was a familiarity he couldn't deny, a connection that seemed to have survived time, strong and unwavering. Clara was the first to speak, breaking the silence with a soft, almost trembling voice. She started talking about the past, about how everything had changed after she left, and how for so long she had tried to understand what it all meant for both of them. Daniel listened intently, each of her words echoing his own doubts and uncertainties. He realized that despite the years and distance, they had both carried that summer with them, as a memory that never fully faded. They talked about the letters that had slowly stopped coming, about the failed attempts to stay in touch, and the reasons why they had moved on. Clara confessed that even though she had lived other stories, she had never managed to forget how she had felt about him. Daniel admitted that no matter how hard he had tried to deceive himself, the love he had felt for Clara was still there, present in every chord he played, in every melody he composed. It was as if music had been the only way to keep her alive in his life. Time, however, had not been kind. They had built separate lives, had families, and that added a new layer of complexity to their reunion. It wasn't just a matter of rekindling a romance from the past. There were responsibilities, people who depended on them, and a feeling of guilt they both carried. Yet the reunion brought forth feelings they thought they had buried forever, as if life were offering them a second chance to mend something that had been interrupted. They stayed silent for a moment, both pondering what it all meant. Could they reignite what they once had? Or would it be better to leave the past where it was? Daniel knew he couldn't ignore the feelings that this reunion had stirred, but he also understood he was no longer the carefree young man who could promise the world. Clara felt the same, but there was a spark of hope. Despite all the time that had passed, there was a truth that couldn't be erased. They still meant a great deal to each other. The days following the reunion were filled with uncertainties. Daniel and Clara knew that their lives had changed, and that the responsibilities they had assumed over the years couldn't be ignored. But still, something bigger seemed to be pulling them back to each other. Conversations that were once impossible became constant, and with every exchange of words, they rediscovered what had brought them together in that distant youth. The connection was still there, strong and unyielding. They met again on a quiet afternoon, far from the show's hustle and the curious stares. This time, the conversation was lighter, more intimate. They walked through a park, reminiscing about past summers and laughing at the things they used to do, as if time had rolled back. Daniel spoke about his career, the ups and downs, and Clara shared stories of her own life, her victories, her challenges. Gradually, the weight they both carried began to dissipate, giving way to something simpler, more genuine. However, there was a question hovering over them. As much as they wanted to relive the love they had once felt, there were responsibilities they couldn't ignore. Clara had a family that depended on her, and Daniel had also built a life he couldn't simply abandon. Yet the presence of one another brought a peace they hadn't felt in a long time, and this peace made them realize that, maybe, it was possible to find a balance between the past and the present. On a clear night under the stars, Daniel took Clara to the place where it all had started. That same festival, now transformed by time, was a living reminder of the summer they shared. He had brought his guitar, and as they sat on the grass, he began to play a new melody, something he had recently composed. The song was soft, nostalgic, but carried a hope, a promise that despite everything, love could still bloom. Clara listened intently, and as the notes filled the air, she realized it was as if Daniel was telling their story through the music. It was a wordless dialogue, but she understood every nuance, every pause. When he finished playing, the silence that followed was filled with meaning. She reached out and touched his hand, a gesture that carried all the courage and acceptance she had gathered over the years. They were no longer the carefree young lovers, but there was a force guiding them, and they decided to follow it together. The following days were marked by difficult decisions and long conversations. They knew they couldn't simply abandon everything to start over, but they also knew it was possible to create something new. Both were willing to face the challenges, to balance the lives they had built with the desire to be together. They decided to take small steps, allowing the love that had once united them to find a new form, adapted to their current realities. On the last night of the festival, Daniel and Clara danced together once more, to the sound of the same song that had brought them together so many years ago. But this time there was a serenity, a certainty that no matter what the future held, they were willing to try. Their long unfinished story had found a new melody, and as they danced under the stars, they knew this was the true love song, a story of courage, acceptance, and above all, hope. Daniel and Clara's story shows us that true love is resilient and can withstand time. Even after years of separation, they rediscovered happiness in each other's presence. Despite the responsibilities and difficulties that arose over their lives, both chose to follow their hearts and rekindle what they once had. This journey reminds us that sometimes fate offers a second chance, and it's up to us to have the courage to seize it, even when the path is not simple. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more heartfelt stories like Daniel and Clarice, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Activate the notification bell to receive updates whenever we publish new videos, and share this video with friends and family who also appreciate beautiful love stories. Who knows, the next story of reunion and hope we tell might resemble your own. See you next time.